Hi, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us for our current edition of Chestnut Chat. I'm Sarah Fitzsimmons. I'm the Chief Conservation Officer with the American Chestnut Foundation, and I work here at Penn State. Joining us today is Michael Alley, also from Penn State. Very excited to welcome here to the program. For a little bit of housekeeping, you guys have been doing a great job. If you have chat, witty banter to talk about, please throw that in the chat. If you have a question, please put that in the Q&A. Generally what I do, and Michael, usually what I do is I hold all the questions until the end. Unless there's something that somebody really needs to know to clarify things, then I might interrupt you, but usually I'm just going to hang out in the background and wait around. For those of you, I think I was announced this last edition, but next month in April, so I think that's April 19th, the third Friday in April, we're going to be talking about growing chestnuts. I think that that's what everybody always really wants to know, the best ways to plant trees. We're going to have a big panel on that edition. We're going to have a mixture of staff and volunteers talk about sort of best practices for planting in containers, planting in the field, planting seedlings, planting bare root seedlings versus containerized, things like that. So that's what we're going to talk about next month in April. So I hope you guys will join us again next month. Again, thank you guys for sticking around. Michael, if you don't mind taking it away, saying a little bit about yourself and what you do here at the university, and also what you're going to tell us about here with how to rethink scientific presentations and how to do a really great job with that.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah. And I apologize for being late. This is all on me. But my name is Michael Alley, and I teach writing and presentations in the College of Engineering. And my background is in science, but I also have a Master of Fine Arts in writing. And I became very interested a number of years ago in how scientists and engineers could better present their work. And you may not necessarily think of your presentation on the American chestnut tree as a scientific presentation, but I certainly do. And so I think that there are a number of things that my teaching of presentations, which is a little bit different from what's typically taught, can benefit you and raise the level of your talks. And that to me is what it is all about, is to make your presentations more understandable, more memorable, and more credible. And so here's an example of one of the slides in the sample presentation that I received from the organization, and my suggestion on perhaps or my revision of that slide. And by the way, the slides that I received are so much better, at such a higher level that I received from your organization that I typically receive. So I developed this different way of presenting science and engineering, and there's a hunger for that, because following PowerPoint's defaults do not work very well. And in fact, I have been asked, I have visited 17 different countries to give this talk, but I'm really excited to give this talk to you today and incorporate a lot of your examples. So yeah, that was just an animation I put in, but we'll take a look at that slide a little bit later. As a resource, I have a website, assertion-evidence.com. There are a number of ways to get to it. You can type in Rethinking Scientific Presentations, will get you there. But there are PowerPoint templates that are there that help you overcome really a lot of the weak defaults of PowerPoint to present a strong set of slides. I would say PowerPoint is a powerful program, but the defaults are just lousy, and you have a bad starting place if you just open up their program and just start from where they give you. But anyway, you can try Googling Rethinking Scientific Presentations if you don't remember assertion. evidence. But there are a lot of, as I said, there are a lot of scientists and engineers who've started adopting this approach. The largest research group at Penn State, they do things on gas turbines, but they have adopted it for all their presentations, not just at conferences, but to their clients in industry and in government, FAA, Department of Energy, and NASA. And also the largest design course at Penn State. This approach has become the standard both for the instructor and then for the student talks. So like you, I would say that the goals for your present, as in your presentation, I'd say the goals for a scientific presentation are that it is understood, remembered, and believed. You might also have an additional goal in your talk that the talk certainly inspires you to care about the American chestnut. And I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, and I saw a number of these huge, beautiful trees that were on the forest floor. And I remember my scoutmaster telling us that that is a chestnut tree. And kind of being in awe of this tree. And so when I was asked to help with your group, I was more than willing to. And by the way, we even on our little property, my family, we had a young chestnut tree, and we were able to harvest just a few nuts each year. And so anyway, I always had appreciation for this tree, but I think after working with your presentation, I would say that appreciation, is moved to a love for this tree. So that's I'd say those are big goals for the presentation. I think all of us also have a personal goal that we wish to be more confident. And that there are two types of confidence: the confidence that's inside what you feel, but then also the confidence that you project. And if you go to the website, I've got a couple of films on those two. And then what does it take? What does it take to have an excellent scientific presentation? I think you need three things. First thing is you need valuable content, and you have that in spades. I mean, you've got a great story. Actually, you've got two or three stories that you are telling about your work. I just think that they are beautiful and they're inspirational. And so you definitely have that. I'd say a second thing is, so Stephen Hawking, he was kind of my hero for that one, because he filled auditoriums wherever he went. And even though he didn't do he wasn't able to do a lot of the things that we typically associate with great presenters, but he still filled those auditoriums, and it was because of his content. I'd say a second thing you need is passion. So I've got a picture of Hans Rosling, the late world health statistician. You can watch one of his talks on TED. Rosling is his name. Watch the 2006 talk. I think that one's incredible. But Rosling, not all of us have that. I mean, he's very magnetic personality. He was a very magnetic personality. He was kind of an amazing, but not all of us have that exuberance. I think also you could look at Jill Bolte Taylor. She's someone who shows her passion, though in a more subdued way. Maybe the better word here is sincere. I mean, a sincere interest in the subject. And and then Charles Townsend here, who is former head of NASA, and he also, I'd say, is a little bit more low key, but boy, from the minute he begins speaking how much he cares about his work. And then the third thing is this keen sense of the audience, who they are, what they know, what they don't know, and then why are they in the room. And so Jane Goodall is my hero on that one, no matter whether she's giving a paper in London or speaking to school kids in Singapore, or raising money in Nebraska, or negotiating with tribal chiefs in Tanzania. She has that sense. So I'm going to focus. I mean, there are a lot of things we can talk about on presentation, but I'm going to focus on slides. And I would say that slides contribute more to the success and downfall of presentations than most people realize. So I have a book. I have written it a couple of times. It's in its second edition now, and I feel pretty good about that edition. I probably will just keep that one. But when I first started researching this book, I didn't really think that much about slides, but then, I mean, this was in the 90s, I started researching it, but then years and, of just studying strong presentations and then trying to determine what distinguishes them from weaker presentations. One thing that I realized is a signature of weaker presentations is that, oh man, the slides just do not contribute or do not contribute nearly as well as they should. And the reason for that is when you create slides, you make decisions about what you're going to include, and then equally important, what you're going to exclude. And also, what are you going to emphasize by putting on the slide, and what are you going to subordinate by folding into your talk? So I'd say that's one thing. Then a second thing is that slides affect the way that you present. A lot of people, when they just bring in one bullet and a second bullet and a third bullet, they become that caged lion where they keep turning back to the screen rather than looking at the audience and thinking about the audience. The best speakers don't do that. And then the third thing is just understanding. So here at Penn State, we've done some experiments where we had the exact same words spoken in a presentation, but in one room we had this assertion evidence approach, and in another room we had just a classic PowerPoint presentation. And then tested the audience afterwards with how much they understood, and results weren't close. Statistically significant to a level of less than 0.01, and actually on the more technical parts, less than 0.001. Those numbers may not mean anything to you, but let's just say I've got 99.9% confidence that this assertion evidence approach has communicated more in that presentation than the typical approach. So what is this assertion evidence approach? What exactly you're doing? And so an interesting thing is I mean, when we developed this approach, it was based on an approach that was in the national labs and probably would have become a standard in science and engineering had not PowerPoint come out in 1987. And PowerPoint kind of spread kind of like a virus. I mean, there were good things with it, but then there were some bad things, these defaults kind of spread around the world. But three big principles with this approach, and interestingly, they are the same principles that TED came up with. So I think a lot of you are probably familiar with TED Talks. So first principle is build your talk on messages and not on topics. Most people, when they kind of build a slide, they up at the top they'll put like introduction, methods, results, discussion, things like that. And what we're saying, and actually what TED is saying, is think more about each slide as a scene of the story of your talk, and then think about what is the main message that you want the audience to walk away with from that scene. If you would just do that right there, people have told me that makes them a better presenter. I mean, that will raise the level. Every single scene, what's the main thing you want people to realize? That will just make you more focused as a presenter. So, and what I would say is that we actually, you might think, well, that's really an unusual way to do it, but actually we see that quite a bit in professional communications. Just take your newspaper. They will have, the headlines will be a message. And so one of my favorite messages from 2020 was that one right there for Pfizer. And I would say another thing is if the audience gets lost Okay, if for some reason, they check a message on their phone and they just kind of lose that transition, and you said something really interesting and they were just thinking about that and they lost the transition into the scene, that message at the top of the slide, that is like a safety rope for that audience. They could read that and they could stay with your talk. They may not necessarily understand, pick up on some of the secondary details, but they would still be able to stay with your talk. So that's the first principle: build your talk on messages, not on topics. So I would say for younger presenters, that's the hardest principle to follow. The second principle, and your group is just awesome at this one, is to support those messages with visual evidence. And so that visual evidence could be photographs, it could be drawings, it could be diagrams, it could be tables, but short tables, not real big tables, but support your messages with visual evidence. And a reason for that is it comes from cognitive psychology. There's a whole area of study. It's got a fancy name, multimedia learning. But the really kind of the leader of this particular research area is Richard Mayer out of UC Santa Barbara. And Mayer's biggest takeaway is that people learn much more deeply from words and relevant images than from words alone. And so that, I would say, and when I look at your presentations, you follow that principle. And then number three is explain these graphics, these visuals, explain those by fashioning sentences on the spot rather than trying to memorize, and certainly rather than reading. And for a lot of people, that is kind of hard. That's letting go the side of the pool, in making a talk. But think of yourself as, in a sense, as a tour guide. I mean, you're going through a forest, but you could think of yourself as a tour guide in a museum, and you are showing different things. It's just much more natural to present that way. One of my favorite examples here, and again, I go to TED on this one, is this Cheryl Hayashi. And what you'll see is that this is a rather technical talk. She's about spiders. So if you have arachnophobia, you won't care for this maybe as much, but there's a great talk. But look at like from 7 to 9 minutes into this talk, look at the way she presents a couple of the graphs. I think it's a tour de force for scientists and engineers. I make them watch that. Anyway, so that's easy. Google TED spiders, you'll get there. Okay, cool. So, at this point, I'm gonna kind of look into the chat, see if anybody had any questions. Yeah. Oh man, there's some people.
Yep.
Some people been to Asheville. Yeah, so beautiful city. It's a different city from when I grew up, but it's an incredible city. Yes, Sarah.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, we haven't seen anything that's really burning in the population right now. Definitely talking about Asheville and a few other things, but I think you're good to proceed. Nothing doesn't look like anyone's needs clarification on anything just yet.
Okay. So, one thing that I didn't mention, but I am going to ask you to kind of jump in the chat and say what you think. And what it has to do is, it has to do with, what would you say is the biggest problem that you see with slides that in typical presentations? If there were one thing you could change about the slides you typically see, what would it be? So no wrong answers here, but like to see what some people say. Hal Brinley, too much text. Okay, yeah. Chance, too busy. Kendra, ditto. Often slides are too crowded, font small. These are great. I have done oh yeah, reduce the words, font too small. Really nice. This is great. So you've hit already on what we've got right there. You've hit I used to do in the early 2000s, I would do these kind of formal surveys of scientists and engineers around the world where, I had gone, and it didn't really matter where I went, whether they spoke English and they were still trying to present in English. People said that the number one problem is too much text, too many words. But then a couple of other problems were, and this was what Chance was getting at, is that the slides are too busy. A lot of people would say it. I didn't know where to look on the slides. Okay. And then the third one, and a number of you talked about that, font's too small. That makes people mad. Okay, that makes people mad, but because they can't read it. So yeah, it's being considerate. Anyway, so I wanted to start. What you're looking at here is the original slide, original title slide that the organization, the foundation had sent to me. And I thought this was a great slide. I mean, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the original. I mean, what I think is nice and what a lot of people don't do is, okay, you've got your title. I mean, you've got your affiliation. That's fantastic. And then you've got images. I mean, orient the audience. And in a sense, you want to spend some time on this scene. On this scene is when you build credibility with the audience, you orient them. I mean, and a little bit inspiring them. And so, I love this scene. So I didn't, my revision wasn't much. One thing that I did suggest doing is just, and this is really small, but color. I wanted to be consistent with color all the way through. And so I chose this kind of darker green as one of the accent colors, and then this lighter green is another accent color. But anyway, but that's kind of small. I kept those images, but I would touch each of those images. I mean, the tree itself, the the nuts in the fall, the actual nuts in the fall, and then the blooms in late June, early July. I would try to, touch on those. So here was the second slide, and on this slide are seen, people gave the mission statement, and again, and then you've got this incredible photograph. So I thought this was pretty cool. But here's what I would have done. I mean, I think this image is just inspiring. I would have had it, and this is kind of a TED style thing. The difference I'd say between TED and assertion evidence is a little bit more technical talk, and I think your talk at times is not necessarily so technical, but and maybe this scene's maybe not so technical, but in other situations it is. And so my revised is I would have started with this image bleeding the screen, but then I would have come in with my message on the mission. Okay. And then I think anything else there that was on that, I would have folded into my talk. By the way, y'all do just a great job, and that a lot of people don't do. I mean, the slides that were sent to me is that the notes pages, you use the notes pages. I think that's one of probably the best features of PowerPoint is you've got these notes pages where you can put all this detail. And so, I mean, that was I think that's really nice that you do that. But some of the other things I probably would have folded into the notes page there. Okay, cool. And then here was a slide I suggest that you have. So, a lot of talks, and they don't do them very well. Typical talks, they'll have something they'll call it an outline slide, and then they'll have like bullet points. You're not going to see any bullet points from what I'm talking about. I mean, bullets are your notes in the end. You can do better than that. But what I would suggest is that I think this talk is sophisticated enough that you're going to want to provide a map for the audience on where they're going to be going. It's going to help them pace themselves. And so, I mean, the first part of the talk, is the sad story about the decline of the great American chestnut. I mean, what it was, and then its decline. And then the second part of the talk is a little bit more scientific on what are things that are that you're doing. You probably could phrase that better than I can. But I mean, what are the features of this particular tree from just a natural perspective? And then the third one is what is being done to try to restore it. Seemed like that was those are the three big stories here. But I would have had a mapping slide, and so this here would be my pitch on that. And rather than map with bullets, which are totally forgettable, I would go with images that you're going to show, and ideally images that you show early on in that section. So here was the original slide. I love the map that you've got, and there's some incredible content on this particular scene. But here is my suggestion on the revision. So it seemed to me that the big takeaway was, and I don't know how many times I've told people this statistic since I learned it from you, but at one time in these many areas, and again, I grew up in Asheville, so I see my area highlighted in that dark green. One in four trees was an American chestnut, and then just kind of it was interesting when I looked at the notes. They really talked about the range of the chestnut, kind of the southern to northern, and then eastern boundary, and then the kind of southern to northern, and then the western boundary. And so I kind of animated in those arrows, and so I kind of animate in arrows in a way to help me kind of stay on task. So they become mnemonics for me, even though they're not words. They provide me with the words. How are we doing so far? Is this interesting to you? It's fascinating to me, but it's just kind of thinking about your talk from just from the slides perspective, how maybe we could do a little bit better, you know?
Michael, there's a question in here since you asked, you gave us an opportunity. He says, do you have guidelines for the maximum number of images that should be included on one slide? He says, I have a slide that contains 7 photos showing typical traits of American chestnut and 2 related species. I discuss each photo. I wonder if breaking the content into 3 separate slides, say 1 per species, would improve the audience experience.
Yeah, it's a great question, Sarah. I'd probably have to take it case by case. I mean, there are times when, if you think about it, what is a film? I mean, a film it's a series of images, and yet we, as an audience, we can process those. We know where to look because we're looking in the same spot. So I don't know if one of those images is replacing another image. I don't know if they're side by side. If they're side by side, or is one complementing the next, such that I would look back, oh, okay, like differences. So I could see 7 images where you show like a seedling, and then, first year, second year, third year, something along those kinds of lines that shows you differences, and then you're kind of looking back and forth. But if it's 7 different characteristics, I'd probably be more inclined to have it such that I would have no more than 4 different things on a slide. There's kind of a rule of thumb on list. People are comfortable with a list of 2s, 3s, and 4s. That's why, like on our phone numbers, we have a 3-digit code, area code, and then we break up the 7-digit number into 3 and 4 because it's a little bit easier for us to process. That came from that cognitive psychology work, by the way. So I think I will talk about that though a little bit later. It'll be a couple of places where it comes in. It's good question.
Thanks,
So
Michael.
here was
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say there's one other question here. While if you don't mind, Neil asks, any thoughts on embedded video? I had a good response from 7th graders with slides that had one landscape showing the main point and then one vertically oriented video walking through a scene.
Yeah, well, videos is something is happening is good. If you were just video watching the tree grow, that probably wouldn't be too exciting. But if it was sped up like over a year, and then it showed the cycles and things like that, then it could be a fascinating video. So, a lot of it depends on how much the audience is learning with film. But yeah, I mean, in general, people really like videos, and and I think, you know, you think about the three-legged stool, is that writing, presenting, and then I think film is the third leg of the stool. I mean, for us in science and engineering to communicate our work. In fact, I didn't write the book, but one of my former students who now works in film, she has written a book, The Craft of Scientific Film, and I mean, it's just a great book. And Lauren Murphy is her name, but I do think film is fantastic, and PowerPoint is really good about, you know, letting you embed it. Make sure when you do embed a film, make sure you think about how are you going to come in to the film, how you're going to transition in, how you're going to transition out. Yeah, very nice. Okay, so this is the original. I think it's great things on this slide, but I like my revision. I love this image. Notice that this image was in the mapping image, and so it comes very early in this section. But here's my revised one. So I kept the image on the left. I loved it, and I love the image on the right, but I think it got kind of short shrift. And so what I did is I took some of the things that were, you know, some of the text, and I kind of brought it in a sense, not as a bullet list, but kind of brought it in as call outs. And so, you know, there was first thing was on the age, as old as 500 years, on the width, out to 15 feet wide, and then 100 feet tall. And then to give that 100 feet tall perspective, the little boy at the base of the tree. God, I love this scene. I mean, I just think this is a cool scene. Anyway, and yeah, so I didn't, you know, I'm not doing a lot of changes here so far. Here was another one that we had. And so this one, I think, you know, gets to whose was it? I can't remember who asked the question. I don't know if Sarah told me, but this one gets to the one about too many images. And I tried in a sense to break it up into different, you know, kind of different list rather than rather than just seeing 7 images. So here was my revision, and you know, first kind of show all the images, but then my main takeaway was American chestnut was a major source of food, timber, and tannins, and then talk a little bit about source of the food. I mean, the nuts themselves, but then also, you know, the wildlife that came, that, you know, that people at that time depended on to eat, and then talk about the timber, then showed kind of, you know, squared off those 2 images. Tried to, with this animation, kind of get the audience to look in that part, and then on the tannins again did something to try to get the audience to look at that part. And so, you know, the main thing is trying to think about the audience. Does the audience know where to look? Here was another one. This one, you know, this is this really sad part of the story, and the fascinating part of the story is the one about the spread of the blight. And so there was the original. You got great graphics on here, but I kind of, in a sense, I tried to clean it up a little bit. I mean, the image is the story here, and I love, you know, and so here, kind of getting to the point about, you know, Neil's point about the embedded video. Wow, if we could come up with a, you know, if we could do a simulation in which we showed these different bands, you know, and then the years. So 1904 is just this little dot, you know, around New York Harbor, and then 1909 and 1914, and then the 30s, and then the 40s, and then the 50s. Kind of bring those in. I think that would be totally cool. Um, yeah, yeah. And then this was the original on kind of the wake of the tragedy. And so I didn't do a lot on that. I liked kind of having that 4 billion big. That's something that Ted does on occasion. There's a guy by the name of Gar Reynolds who gives advice on them, and he's an artist. I don't know as much about artistry. I would defer to him, but he does that on occasion, and I think 4 billion would be worth doing that. Yeah. Yep, and then these images are sad. And then here we get a little bit into the science. And so, I mean, I think his main thing is just the official name of the blight, but also cluing in the audience. Okay, we're going to dive in a little bit to the science about what happens. And then the survival data. Yeah. Yeah. And so here I did something. They usually have the headline, scientific talk. They usually have it up at the top, left justified in that corner. But, your talk, I think, is a little broader. I think we could do it a little bit differently. Okay, so, this might be a good point again, but I spent some time thinking about the sentence, reading through all the notes, trying to decide what is most important. I liked that term, functionally extinct. I thought that was a really well chosen term, and so I want to include that in that headline. I spent a lot of time thinking about headlines because to me it is the the sentence from that scene I want the audience to remember. Sarah, how are we doing? Do we have any more questions here?
There was one here by Scott. He said, what if you're teaching and have more than 4 points to take away from an example? Do you leave it all on one slide, or do you break it into multiple slides and risk loss of continuity?
Yeah, I'd probably say I'd break it. If it's 5, then probably prepare the audience for it. But when I'm teaching, I do things a little differently. I mean, I talk about assertion evidence, but I love discovery. Ideally, you'd want the students to discover things in a class. And so what I'll sometimes do is that I don't know if this one's a good one to. It could be. It could be. I mean, on this one, maybe not with this headline, but I could see if I were teaching this information to students and they had read things before, I would want them. I would want to challenge them if they really understood what is meant by the word extinct, what's meant by the term functionally extinct. So rather than have the takeaway, I might start the scene with a question. you know, if if the chestnut tree is extinct, why are there still trees, in existence? And then let the students try to answer that. And then when the students answer it, then bring in the headline. So that's one difference I'd say about teaching. But then to Scott's question is, yeah, sometimes I do break them up. If there are takeaways that I want them to have, I mean, I just did some takeaways in a class, and I probably was looking at the same example, and I had 3 scenes on it. So I had the same visual evidence, but there were 3 things I really wanted them to take away. And so I had 3 scenes with headlines. And so the transitions, I made those transitions, in my speech.
Yeah, and then a couple more things. I know, so Scott goes on to say he said that he's had great results with film clips. It really keeps people engaged. And then Mark makes an observation. He says, interesting that in the PowerPoint templates, except the blank page, they have a little title block to fill in. And he's noticed that those have often been removed and that they have more impact when they are removed. So I thought that was a good observation from Mark.
Yeah, so Ted does not follow PowerPoint's defaults. Yeah, a feeling is, and I would say the less, let me put it this way, the more technical the takeaway, then the more likely I am to have a sentence at on the slide. But if it's a scene that's not really such, so technical, then in some cases, I might just have just the image, and just a bleed the screen image. So if you look at a lot of TED Talks, you'll see that there are a lot of scenes that'll just have an image. And the thinking is this takeaway is not really that complex. The speaker should be able to communicate it to the audience. And when the audience thinks back on the talk, they should be able to remember that takeaway. But I mean, people put in like, I don't know what PowerPoint's defaults are because I don't use them, maybe 44 point. They will put like introduction. And for me, just what is zero? Because you're putting it up at probably the most valuable space on the slide. You've got this term, and a lot of times when people see those, they already know where they are. And so it's really not doing very much for you. If you just spent a little bit more, you could have stated what the takeaway is there, be it the motivation or be it a background statement. Cool. Let me see if I got any more. Oh, yeah, I just did this one last night. And listen, I'll be glad to share these, before and afters with you. You can have I'll create a file, give it to Sarah, and Sarah, you can find a way to distribute it if people are interested. But here was the original. I love this. I love the information on this one. And so, my revision kind of looks as follows, is that, my big takeaway, and I could have done left justified, I was just being cute, but American chestnut trees are most easily found when the tree is in bloom or with fruit. And so the bloom occurs in late June, early March. And so what I did is kind of put a timeline at the bottom, and then that's where I brought in the late bloom, early March. And so, I mean, there were a couple of things I was thinking of. One thing, one is it kind of looks like a pipe cleaner. That was something that was in the notes. And then, smells of bleach. That's another one. So I went with the smell of bleach because they could look at that and see the pipe cleaner. And then the, the actual nut itself, and that it's, encased here in this large green spiny thing. So yeah, and then I kind of animated in fall. Pretty cool. So, what I would just conclude here is yeah, that, that this approach, and I don't think it was as dramatic in yours because you've got such great visual evidence, and because you do such a good job of putting in your speaking notes, what it is you're going to say. But that just assertion evidence talks are just better understood by audiences and project more confidence from speakers, because speakers are there when they turn back to the slide, it's more natural. They're turning back to explain visual evidence. That's kind of, again, think about that tour guide in the museum. You're turning back to explain visual evidence. And so rather than reading notes, and so it just projects more confidence. And so you can search Rethinking Scientific Presentations or Assertion Evidence. And so, with that, I'll open it up for any final questions.
That's really great, Michael. I'm so happy, and thank you for taking our actual presentation and making these great changes. I really loved it. I had not seen, but I love the color blocking that you did, like that animation to really highlight the different things that you're talking about. So that's a great idea that I had not seen. I mean, among other things that you've done, but thank you. Some really, neat little tidbits that we can do. John has put a link in here from a book from Lauren Murphy and you
cool.
for the craft of scientific films. So that looks like a great resource.
Yeah, and my book is the Craft of Scientific Presentations. We kind of are doing that as a series, and that one's easy to find. If you just type in the Craft of Scientific Presentations, you'll get that one. And I got the Craft of Scientific Writing. You can get that one. But yeah, Murphy's book just came out in the past few months.
Yeah. And then Clark, who is an engineer. We have several engineers here in our audience, which I always thought it fascinating that the American Chestnut work really attracts a lot of engineers to the program. But Clark says, I found that sprinkling in some wow facts helps keep the audience engaged. And he throws out a couple of wow facts about that chestnut can grow up to an inch in diameter a year, or that Appalachian farmers lost cash crops during the Depression, and he goes on to it. So for those of you, check out the chat what Clark has put in here. But I guess, do you have any thoughts about, sort of wowing the audience or something that keeps folks engaged as you give a talk?
Well, I think a couple of things here. There's a really nice book. I'm going to stop the share and so that we can just uh, is that there was this book that came out by Heath Brothers. Yeah. Made to Stick is the name of the book. So one's a professor at Duke, one's a professor at Stanford. But what they did is they examined like commercials and advertising, to try to distinguish why are some so memorable? Those of us who are a little bit older remember those windy commercials of the of the 1970s and 80s. Where's the beef? And why some are so memorable, and it comes down to this wow facts. A lot of them are surprising. I mean, the thing that you told me is that it grows an inch in diameter a year, and that's wow. I mean, and just some of these numbers, 5,000, a 30-inch chestnut tree will drop 5 to 6,000 chestnuts each year. Whoa. I mean, that's impressive. Plus, that's 5 to 6 times more than an oak tree will do. So that kind of puts things in a perspective. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah,
I
and so the Anita here is asking, and this is the question your team's going to have to answer. Are you talking about height? Or are you talking about diameter? So I don't know.
Yeah, and then a quick question. So Jack asks, and what grade would you have given the original slides before you made the changes?
Oh man, I mean, A minus, B plus, A minus. I mean, I again, these are really good. I thought they were winners. I thought they were winners. The ones that I got were winners. In a sense, I just tried to, just do some things, make them a little bit cleaner, and make the message stand out more. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
tell you, I see a lot of, you know, I, I do this kind of talk a lot. And of all the organizations that they send me a sample, this one was the best.
Yeah, hooray.
Yeah.
Mary Powell St. Louis asks, do you think it's important to cite a website as a source on the slides? It might be tiny font and not
Yeah.
readable, but how important is that?
So, what I would say to Mary is, this idea about citing, I put the full citation in the notes page. I put a kind of a shorthand reference listing on the slide. So if it's somebody, I want to make sure I have their last name. And so it's not, I mean, it's smaller type. I might even go as low as 14 point, 18 to 14 point. I put that in a bottom corner. I might even not, if my slide itself is, I'm using white type against a dark background, I might use just a little grayer on that one. So it doesn't dominate. But if that person's in the room, I want that person to know that hey, we're citing it. And actually, I often look to the bottoms of slides when I'm presenting, when I'm turning back to look at the visual evidence, because then that will remind me, oh, I want to say that person's name during the talk. Now that's more of a scientific talk. I don't know if that's as big here, but yeah, just author here is often what I'll do. Maybe in this one, probably just author last year. But if it's a website, it would just be just the STEM. Okay, so Department of Agriculture, something like that.
Okay. Catherine asks, what's a good way to build confidence in presentations without looking down at notes or looking at the slides for reminders?
Mm, I I practice and I practice in the slideshow mode, and I try to have one of my practices be as close to what it's going to be original, what it's going to be on that particular time. I give the talks to my dogs when I go on walks. I mean, they love my talks, everything, mainly because they're on a walk. And so, I mean, that would be time that I wouldn't be doing something, but but I ended up making it productive. And so, yeah, and then just, the first time you give a talk, you'll have a lot of energy for it, but you may not be the best. And then the second time you give it, then it gets a little bit better. The third time it gets a little bit better. So,
Yeah,
but
Kendra says she gives her talks in the car. I think that's another
yeah,
good way
yeah.
to do it.
Jane Goodall, I mean, even when she's given the same talk night after night after night, she still insists on 45 minutes before that talk
mm,
so that she can go through it. She's very good. If she needs that time, I know I do.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Sort of a technical question. Jack asks, serif or sans serif fonts for a presentation?
Oh, yeah. Well, so I mean, here's the thing. A serif typeface has advantage in your situation is it's got an historic look to it. Disadvantage is it's not as clean as a sans serif. So, if and one thing to think about is if people are looking at the screen from an angle, then that makes more and more of a difference. Also, some serif typefaces have really thin strokes in certain parts, and then you lose it slows the reading. So I typically go sans serif bold. And that way, if people are looking at an angle, if people are looking, from more of a distance, they've got a better chance of recognizing what I'm saying.
Yeah. Some good questions here. I want to thank the audience for coming up with some of these great questions. Doug asks, how about debriefing with selected viewers afterwards to see what could be improved? Do you ever do that? And what's a good way to do it if you do?
Oh yeah, I try to have some, there's somebody in the audience. My wife, she's tough, but she will be honest with me. So you don't want to debrief with a person who just, is going to say, "Oh, it's great." I mean, you want to come, but I don't know if I want to do it with my wife all the time because she's just focuses in on the negatives. I mean, ideally, you like to have somebody who's going to put it in perspective. Hey, here's what you did well. Here's how you could take it to that next level. And here's where I was a little bit confused. And so, I mean, those are valuable.
Super helpful. Yeah, absolutely. And again, like having someone like you to be able to go through and be like, because I've given, truth be told, I've given this talk. I mean, who knows how many, hundreds, if not thousands of times. Not that specific talk, but talking about chestnut and
Yeah,
everything. And
yeah.
it's really easy to get to put blinders on and just give the same thing. So like being able to refresh it over the years and also just getting that yeah, where were people confused, what can you do better? So that's always great to be able to do that even if you have
Yeah.
given the talk hundreds of thousands of times. Fred asks, do you suggest an optimal talk length? Because I know your talk was maybe 35-40 minutes, which
Mm.
seems so. I don't know, do you have anything like specific length that you should shoot for or not?
People get tired, but Einstein Einstein spoke once for 3 hours straight in Japan, and with the things and 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 people were disappointed it wasn't longer because they heard in another city it had been 4.5 hours. Now, uh, what I would say is so much depends on how much content you have. I think you've got a lot of content. And so if people are learning things, they will stay with you. But people do become tired after yeah. So Mayer talks about this kind of work. The cognitive psychologist will talk about this kind of work that people will get tired after 10 minutes of you just talking. So if you noticed, I asked a question, had people put things in the chat. I stopped and asked if people had questions. I thought I did that to break it up a little bit. And if you can, I mean, this is what I do in classes. If you can, you know, have some of those scenes begin with a question, just an interesting, provocative question that the slide's going to answer, then yeah, I would do that and see if you could get the audience, because it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun when people are contributing to the message as well.
Yeah, and how concurs. I know he's given a lot of talks. He's a great presenter. He says he likes to ask the audience a question and helps wake them up. And Dana mentions Feynman, who is a phenomenal presenter. I mean, honestly, I could listen to him talk, and maybe it is. It's how you present it and the information. I mean, I could listen to Feynman for hours.
Yeah.
Um, so Jeffrey asks, and this is he said, "Have you watched a video of yourself giving a lecture? I can't do it. It's too embarrassing, but I know it would be good to be able to do it. But do you do that? Do you do that and then pick up things
I've
that you could have done
I've
better?
I've done it. I have done it. It's painful, but then I think, well, okay, I did this okay, but oh my gosh, I've got to be careful about doing this or that. So, but I think that's a great idea.
Yeah,
If you've never done it, I think it's a great idea. And then if you do a lot of talks, every so often you need to watch yourself.
it's a good idea. Um, Catherine asks, what are your thoughts on handouts to accompany presentations? For example, if we're talking statistics or data specifics off the slides, is it
Mhm.
helpful for them to have that in front of them, or is it distracting?
I tend to do handouts after. So, because a lot of times I do want to ask questions, and then that doesn't work. But there could be some handouts that you want them to have during the presentation. So it might be a real detailed table. You run the risk that during the presentation they're going to get focused on that table. But you got so many things with communication is what's the advantage, what's the disadvantage that you have.
So Narul has been asked to give a talk at Texas A&M Plant Breeding. Hey Narul, he asks, I'd like to include a 5 to 10 minute history and would like to use some of your slides. I hope you're okay with this. I'm okay with that. If you're okay with that.
Oh yeah, Sarah, I'm going to send these to you and you can
Okay.
distribute. Yeah.
That's great. And then Clark says if the late Jim Finley, another Penn Stater, yeah, we mourn his loss for sure, was giving a talk on washing paint dry, I'd be there because he would have made it interesting and engaging. And I think Michael, you outlined that at the beginning, that
Yeah.
having someone who is sincere and engaged about that topic is just so important. And the
Yeah.
folks you mentioned, I mean, Einstein, Feynman, I mean Jim Finley, yourself, like it's that really is a big part to it.
Yeah. Well, it is. Yep. Having great content, you've got great content, showing your passion, interest in it, and then thinking about that audience, thinking, trying to imagine the talk from their perspective.
Yeah. I got a couple more questions if you can hang with us here for a couple
Sure.
more minutes.
Sure.
So do you have any advice for keeping the online audience engaged and feel included during hybrid presentations?
So, one thing I like to do during a live presentation is I like to have a black slide every so often that then essentially just puts all the focus on me. I move to a part of the room that I wouldn't normally stand. Black slides don't work well online. And so online's, is fascinating. Uh, during COVID, we we got a lot of practice with online, and I think you've got to move quickly, you've got to be efficient, you've got to, if you can do things in the chat, if you can, I'm a big Kahoot person now because of online, and so sometimes in a longer, actually I use Kahoot now in almost every class period I teach because I just think it is, particularly with a large class, everybody in the room, I can find out whether they understood something or not.
'Cause
But
I actually don't think most of our audience knows what Kahoot is. I've actually used it a
oh
couple of times, but do you mind telling folks what that is?
yeah, so yeah, I didn't know what Kahoot was during the pandemic. I was doing a large course, 300 students at Virginia Tech, and and I was using chat, and I thought I was really, on the edge. But I asked them what were the best things that they had seen faculty use to engage students online. And number one answer was Kahoot. So at Penn State, we have this program called Top Hat that's very complicated, but Kahoot, Kahoot, just Google that. And then it is a free program to a point. I mean, you can't do very many people, but I don't, with younger audiences, I don't have to explain anything. I just say we're going to play a Kahoot, and then there's a code number. Essentially what you do is you create a set of questions, and then once you save it, then that is assigned this code. And once you give the students the code, they go to www.kahoot.it. They type in that code, and then they type in their name, and then they're playing. And then you can put a question on the screen, and everybody can answer. And what it does is it celebrates the people who do the best. If you've got a small group, if you've got like 7 people, I don't want to play Kahoot, because it celebrates the top 5, and then the bottom 2 don't feel very well, So, I mean, I don't do that. But I've got 70 today. Yeah, this will be fun.
Cool. I have a couple questions about specific fonts. So John asks Segho, Tahoma, Calibri. I also had John Hempel bring up the dreaded Comic Sans. I don't know. Do you have any specific fonts that you like or don't?
I just made a decision about Calibri a number of years ago, and that's what I go with. Arial is what they used to use. So fonts have, even though they have the same supposed height, let's say 24 points, the width varies quite a bit. And you don't want one that's too narrow, like Arial narrow is like it's too, there are too many words then on a line. But then other ones, they're just so broad that you can't really get as much information in. I like Calibri. I see Segho sometimes, but I haven't paid much attention to it. Comic Sans, had a colleague, and we worked on a course. He loved Comic Sans, and so he would use that. But that was his personality, and I learned to love Comic Sans just because I loved him.
Yeah. Clark Riley says, though Comic Sans is unpopular with graphic artists, it was designed for simple presentation, is what Clark said.
Yeah, I could. Yeah, I don't use it, but I've got a soft spot in my heart for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John says people writing on Blackboard don't write in Times Roman. That's true. Well, yeah. Well, I have one more question. I want to thank you. This was really great. I really appreciate you sharing all of this information for us. And before I take this last question, I think for our audience and for you, I mean, one of the reasons I'm so happy that you're able to give this talk to us and help us was you mentioned confidence. I think a lot of the folks here have either given this talk or are wanting to give this talk about the American chestnut. And I mean, a really big part of our work is being able to marry that enthusiasm with the scientific portion of it. I mean, a really light version of it, but people gaining the confidence with the information and having something that they can present to a really wide variety of people. It could be the layperson. It could be even like Narul, who is going to be giving a very scientific presentation to scientists, but he needs to, give that sort of intro of why should they care, kind of thing to it. So I think this was really helpful on a lot of different levels. So thank you. Before we leave, I want to Dan Lefevre's question, I think, is a really good one, and especially for scientists. He says his major pet peeve of ag research presentations are graphs that are too detailed to absorb in a short time, or that can't be seen at the back of the room. And I think as someone who gathers scientific evidence, and you have this graph that is so imperative to what you're trying to convey to the audience, and you think,
Mhm.
well, this graph is so important, I need to show it. But if people aren't getting it, how do
Mhm.
you balance that, like between
Oh,
like, yeah, so it sounds like you have a good answer to that.
so the one thing I would suggest is again, go to that Cheryl Hayashi talk about spiders. Go at about the 7 minute mark. You're going to see two graphs. You're going to see a stress strain curve, and actually there are five curves on it. All right. And what I love what Hayashi does is she doesn't explain all five. What she does is she explains the one that has the highest stress, achieves the highest stress, and the one that has the most strain, elasticity, you might think about. And then the ones in the middle, you don't necessarily need to worry about those. But she talks. These are different kinds of web. Spiders spin like five different kinds of web, and so she talks about their thing. And then the other one is different species of spiders. So it's a scatter plot, and it's got like 25 species of spiders. So there are 25 points on there. She doesn't talk about all 25. She just talks about some of them. She uses animation on that one incredibly well, in that she kind of animates in the phylogeny at the bottom to show, what these points, where they kind of are. She divides them up into orb weaving spiders, and then I don't know there's another grouping she has, but she uses like color, like a yellow background to differentiate those. Uh, and then she just builds the story. But you know what, Jim, was it that you said? What, the point that Jim says is that the graph needs to have a story, needs to have a takeaway. There might be some minor takeaways, but you want to, in a sense, you really want to orient the audience. If it's a line graph, what's the y-axis? What's the x-axis? If you have different curves, what do these curves represent? And yeah, that's. But I would watch those 2 minutes. I think she just does it. It's a tour de force. Yeah.
That that's great. Well, I again thank you for these excellent resources. I think what we'll do, so Hal's been on here. He'll help us post some of those resources that you mentioned
Okay.
up on the Chestnut Chat archives. We'll post this recording and make some of the slides available to folks who are going to give that talk. Michael, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Really appreciate your time both for this
I
talk and going
apologize for
over the
being
information.
late. Yeah.
No worries. It happens. Again, we were able, we built a community here. We were able to really
Okay.
share a special moment together while we were
Okay.
waiting. So that's
Okay.
great. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, again, to remind our audience, next month we're going to be talking about growing American chestnuts. I know everybody is really excited about that. We're actually going to have several panelists. We'll keep some of your great tips in mind while we put together those slides, Michael, but I think we'll probably have a lot of videos and sort of on
Okay.
camera presentations for that too. So it'll be a little easier than
Yeah.
some strict scientific evidence that we're presenting. But in the meantime, I hope everybody enjoys their spring. Any final thoughts, Michael?
No, just aim high in your presentations, and if you mess up a little bit, that's not a big deal. If the audience is learning things, they don't really care. Okay, that I would say is and enjoy it. I love to give talks. It's a gift. You're giving a gift to people when you're doing a really good talk. It's a gift of knowledge, and you've got a great story.
That's great. Well, thanks so much. Everybody have a great spring and we'll see you next month. Take care.
Okay.